Greetings. My name is Pastor Ari Peralta, and I would like to greet everyone a happy new year. Another year has passed, and what a year it has been. Now, I don't know about you, but as I went through our lessons in Psalms, I couldn't help but reflect on the year that has passed. Reading Psalms 115, especially its words about idols made of silver and gold, made me reflect on the corruption scandal that rocked our country last year. I mean, before we've heard of corruption in the hundreds of millions, right? And I thought that was already outrageous. But what did we hear last year? Wow, billions. I mean, I could have never imagined that billions could be pocketed by a select few. But as we all know, it happened. These corrupt officials stole what was meant to be for the people whom they were supposed to serve. As I heard this news, one thing that came to my mind was, do these people have any fear of God? Do they even believe in God? Or perhaps are they like what Psalms 15 speak of, people whose confidence rests in silver and gold, in things fashioned by human hands? When you hear news like this, people respond differently. For those whose idols are silver and gold, well, for them, they might be inspired. They might be saying, perhaps I am in the wrong business. I need to be a government contractor or perhaps a politician. However, for us who believe in God, we call on God for justice. In our prayers, we say to the Lord, Lord, bring these people to justice. May the truth come out. And for those who suffer because of these corrupt officials, their cry to God is different. Perhaps they say, Lord, is there no justice to us? Psalm 115 together with 92 and 138 speaks to our context today. They remind us that trust is never neutral, that misplaced confidence shapes both personal lives and public realities, and that blessings flow from a deeper source than wealth, power, or institutions. As we begin another year, this Psalms invites us to reflect not only on what has gone wrong, but on where trust has settled and what kind of life that trust is quietly forming us. Let us now go into Psalm 115, particularly first in this first part would be 4 to 7. After beginning with a prayer that gives glory to God's name, the psalm turns its attention outward toward the gods the nation trusts. It speaks of idols made of silver and gold, shaped by human hands. These are carefully crafted objects formed with skill and designed to inspire. They seem impressive, they feel solid, and convey a sense of value. Yet if you would notice, the psalm lingers over them, and it is to reveal something deeper about what they really are and how they function in human life. These idols are the product of human making. They originate in human desire, imagination, and even anxiety. They take shape from what people believe will give them secure life, protect the future, and guarantee success. In this sense, Psalm 115 reflects on the human tendency to invest ultimate trust in things we can fashion, measure, and manage. The psalm gives careful attention to their features, mouth, eyes, hands, feet, to expose the gap between appearance and reality. Yes, they resemble life, yet they remain detached from it. They carry form without vitality, presence without responsiveness. They occupy space in the world, but they do not engage it. What the psalm is saying is this: idols cannot participate in the moral, relational, and responsive dimensions of life. They do not hear suffering. They do not attend to injustice or act with compassion. They reflect human longing, but they cannot answer it. They mirror human power, but they cannot sustain it. The Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann notes that this kind of description is a theological diagnosis. The psalm is helping the community discern what happens when trust is placed in realities that cannot give life back. Idols promise stability, yet they remain closed in on themselves. They invite devotion, yet they cannot respond. Another scholar, John Goldingay, presses this point further by reminding us that the psalm assumes something important about human beings, that we are always trusting something. Trust naturally settles into whatever appears able to carry us to the future. And the question that Psalm 115 raises is where trust finally rests. This psalm draws attention to the way misplaced trust quietly reshapes life. When devotion settles into what cannot see, hear, or act, life itself begins to take on those same contours, narrowed, closed, and unresponsive. And so the psalm invites the listener to reflect not only on what is being worshipped, but on what kind of life that worship is forming. At this point, without yet naming the consequence directly, Psalm 115 prepares us to see that trust always shapes the one who give it. And it is precisely at this point, having exposed the nature of idols, that the psalm will now ask where trust might be placed instead. At this point, the psalm is no longer only asking what claims our trust. Now it presses us to consider how that trust is shaping us. Because whatever we entrust with our lives gradually forms the kind of people we become. We now go to verse 8. It says here, "Those who make them are like them, so are all who trust in them." This is my second point, becoming like what we trust. The psalmist is no longer talking about objects of worship. He now speaks about formation, about what happens to people over time. Again, I refer to John Goldingay, who notes that idolatry in the Psalms is a relational choice. To trust something is to allow it to shape our expectations, our habits, and eventually our character. Trust forms us. Now, let's go to Brueggemann, wherein he presses this insight even further. For him, what a community entrusts itself to gradually shapes its imagination, values, and sense of what is normal and acceptable. Thus, if what we trust has no capacity for compassion, our lives begin to lose tenderness. If what we trust is driven by accumulation, then our desires learn to revolve around gain. If what we trust is lifeless, then our inner spiritual life gradually also becomes lifeless. It is at this point that we can look to Psalm 92, another psalm that we studied, to give us further insights. Psalm 92 observes that the wicked sometimes flourish, they appear successful and established, their lives even look impressive for a season. But this flourishing is like grass. It grows quickly, spreads easily, and disappears just as fast. Its roots do not go deep enough to endure. And I think if we look at the news of what is happening in the Philippines, we see this happening already to those who felt like as if their wealth will always be there. Brueggemann points out that the psalm is not denying the reality of prosperity, but this psalm is questioning its durability. What seems strong in the short term doesn't always last over time. Psalm 92 then turns to a different image. The righteous are now linked to the palm tree and the cedar of Lebanon. They speak of slow growth, deep roots, and long endurance. Their flourishing is tied to being planted in the presence of the Lord. Now, the connection between Psalm 115 and Psalm 92 becomes very clear here. Both Psalms are concerned with our formation. Both are asking what kind of people we are becoming through what we trust. Psalm 115 directly identifies the danger wherein trusting in lifeless powers gradually reshapes us into their image. Now, Psalm 92 offers the alternative vision. Those who root their lives in God's steadfast love grow differently. Their lives carry resilience. They continue to bear fruit even when circumstances change, even as they grow older. Brueggemann observes that the Psalms assume a moral shape to the world even when appearances suggest otherwise. What we give ourselves to eventually reveals itself in the kind of life we live. The proud do not endure indefinitely. The faithful are sustained by God's covenant faithfulness. This is not a promise that life will be easy. I think we can all agree with that. But Psalm 92 never says that in the first place. Instead, it suggests that trust in God cultivates a life that can withstand time, loss, and uncertainty. Now, going back to Psalm 115, our main passage, it asks us not just what do I believe, but what is forming me. Because trust becomes visible in the way we speak, the way we relate to others, and the way we respond to power, money, and security. Now, over time, it shows up in the kind of people we are becoming. And it is at this point that now the psalm gently, firmly confronts us. Whatever claims our trust will shape our lives. That is why the psalm does not end with idols. It moves us toward a decision about where our trust truly belongs. Now, my third point, which is again going to Psalm 115, but this time in verses 9 to 18, and in dialogue with Psalm 138, wherein it talks about trust reoriented to the God who blesses and remembers. After exposing the danger of idolatry and explaining how trust reshapes us, Psalm 115 turns toward an invitation. Beginning in verse 9, the tone shifts from description to address. It says, O Israel, trust in the Lord. He is their help and their shield. This call is repeated, widening its reach from Israel to the house of Aaron and finally to all who fear the Lord. The repetition is an act of recentering. The psalm gathers a community that has been pulled in many directions and calls it back to a single posture of trust. If we can see the history of Israel, this is what happened to them. Again, now the psalm is calling them. Here, trust is anchored in who God has shown himself to be. The psalm describes God as one who helps, who shields, who remembers, and blesses. All of these are relational claims rooted in the lived experience of the people. Goldingay notes that the kind of language of, or the language of remembering in Psalms conveys that God remains committed to them. It's not just thinking of them, but it is commitment, it is attentiveness to their lives and involvement in their future. Verse 12 puts it directly to us. The Lord has been mindful of us, He will bless us. The psalmist speaks with confidence shaped by history. God's faithfulness has been enacted again and again in the life of the community. This confidence becomes especially striking in the context of the psalm. The people who pray this psalm live in a world where power is often misused, where systems fail, and where those who entrusted with responsibility betray that trust. Doesn't that sound familiar to our context today? And so we can look to Psalm today. Psalm 115 places hope in something deeper than institution and more lasting than wealth. Verse 16 grounds this hope in a bold theological claim. The heavens are the Lord's heavens, but the earth He has given to human beings. Brueggemann hears here a vision of God's sovereignty that does not cancel human responsibility. And I think this is something that we must learn today. We have responsibility. God reigns, yet He entrusts the earth to us humans. Idolatry distorts that trust. However, faithfulness restores it. At this point, again, we can dialogue with the other Psalms that we studied this week, Psalm 138, to give us further insight. Psalm 138 speaks of a God who reigns from on high and yet remains deeply attentive to those who are lowly. It declares, "For though the Lord is high, He regards the lowly, but the haughty He perceived from far away." This verse adds depth to what Psalm 115 means when it says God remembers. God's kingship is expressed through nearness to those who are vulnerable, overlooked, or burdened. Goldingay emphasizes that divine greatness in the psalm is consistently shown through care for those without power. God's attention moves toward those who depend on Him, not toward those who rely on themselves. The psalm does not deny God's awareness of the proud, but it portrays a different kind of relationship, one marked by distance rather than engagement. And so it is beautiful to know that, yes, as human beings, especially for us Christians, for us who fear the Lord, who are in power, we are given that responsibility on earth to make God's kingdom felt here on earth. And we can do that by putting our faith in the Lord and not in idols. At the same time, for those who has been victimized by the corruption and injustice in the Philippines, not only can they look to the people, but they can look at the Lord Himself, because the Lord will rescue them and He looks at them with compassion. Psalm 138 gives voice to a confidence that echoes 115 trust. The Lord will fulfill His purpose for me. Your steadfast love, O Lord, endures forever. Do not forsake the work of your hands. Here, the work of God's hands is a life shaped by God's care and sustained by God's commitment. That conviction illuminates Psalm 115 closing movement, wherein the psalm ends with a quiet affirmation that life itself, lived in trust, becomes a form of praise. Those who trust the Lord remain oriented toward the living God, even in a world marked by instability. Psalm 115 does not promise an escape from difficulty, but it promises God's presence. It offers enduring faithfulness. The psalm teaches us that trust placed in God does not empty life of responsibility or struggle, but it gives life coherence. It anchors hope beyond what can be bought, manipulated, or controlled. And so, as we begin another year, Psalm 115 invites us to relocate our trust. Where do we put our trust? Not toward what appears powerful in the moment, but toward the God who remembers, who blesses, and remains near to those who call upon Him. In conclusion, again, as we begin this new year, Psalm 115 does not ask us to deny the realities that we have lived through, but it invites us to see them more clearly. It helps us recognize where trust has been misplaced and how that trust has shaped us. At the same time, the psalm reminds us that trust can be reoriented. There is hope for this country. God has not withdrawn from the world. God remains attentive, involved, and faithful. He remembers, He blesses His people, and sustains life even when human system fails. Psalm 92 assures us that what is rooted in God endures beyond appearances, and Psalm 138 gives us language for gratitude rooted in deliverance rather than in denial. These Psalms collectively teach us about aligning ourselves with God. This is how we can move toward a better future, not just for our nation, but for God's kingdom on earth. And so as we step into this new year, Psalm 115 invites us to entrust ourselves again to the living God. And may that trust shape the kind of people we are becoming. This is my lecture for Lesson 21, and I hope that you have been blessed by it. Thank you, and God bless.